The shadow in the window. Ella was excited when she first found the old Victorian house. She had always dreamed of living somewhere with character, and the house, though covered in ivy and with creaking worn wooden floors, had a charm that made her instantly feel at home. Nestled at the edge of town, it was the perfect retreat from her busy city life. However, on her very first night, Ella felt something strange. As she settled into her new bed, she noticed a chill in the air, far colder than the drafty old walls could account for. Brushing it off as nerves, she wrapped herself in her blanket and fell asleep quickly. Around midnight, she woke to a faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was so soft that at first she thought it was part of a dream, but as she grew more alert, she realized it was coming from her bedroom window. Heart pounding, Ella got up and tiptoed over to the window. Outside, the night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and only the gnarled branches of an ancient tree were visible in the shadows. The tapping stopped as she approached, and for a moment, she thought maybe a branch had been knocking against the glass. But something about the sound was off. It was too steady, too intentional, almost as if someone were lightly knocking with their knuckles. Shivering, Ella turned and climbed back into bed, trying to shake off the strange feeling. The next few nights were peaceful, and she started to forget about the tapping. She spent her days exploring the town, meeting the locals, who always seemed to grow strangely quiet when she mentioned where she was living. Some offered her polite smiles, while others seemed to avoid the subject entirely. But on the fifth night, as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder this time, more insistent. Goosebumps prickled her skin as she listened, her heart hammering in her chest. She sat up and stared at the window, the sheer curtains slightly moving in the draft. Something about the sound felt wrong. She was too frightened to investigate that night, so she lay awake, listening as the tapping continued, stopping only as dawn broke and the first hints of light filled the room. The next morning, she went to the town's small library to research the house. She was curious now, unsettled by the sound and the icy feeling that lingered in her room at night. In the library's dusty records, she discovered a story about a young woman named Margaret, who had lived in her house over a century ago. Margaret had been beautiful but lonely, living there after her husband had died in a tragic accident. The townsfolk believed she had gone mad, often seen staring blankly out the window, waiting for something or someone only she could see. And then one night, Margaret vanished without a trace. Some claimed they had seen a dark figure in the window that night, but no one knew for sure. The townspeople said Margaret had been taken by the Shadow Man, a spirit that haunted lonely souls. Ella felt a chill as she read this, but she convinced herself it was just a story. She returned home and for several nights heard nothing. She started to relax, thinking perhaps her mind had been playing tricks on her. But a week later the tapping returned, louder and more frantic. This time it was accompanied by something worse. A faint, shadowy figure standing just outside her window. From her bed, Ella could only see its silhouette. It was tall and gaunt, with unnaturally long limbs, its form shifting and swaying like smoke. She was frozen in place, too terrified to move, her eyes glued to the figure as it hovered, motionless, just outside her window. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if demanding her attention. Finally, in a burst of courage, she scrambled out of bed, turned on the light, and pulled the curtains back. But when she looked out, there was nothing there. Just the quiet, empty street, bathed in the glow of the street lamp. Her breath was shaky, and she couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The shadow's hollow gaze burned into her mind. The next day, Ella was determined to leave. She began packing, trying to ignore the icy feeling that had settled in the house, the way the air seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. But that night, as she was packing the last of her belongings, she heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from not only her bedroom window but from every window in the house, an echoing chorus of knocks that grew louder, more urgent, as if something was trying to break through. Panicked, Ella ran to the front door, only to find it locked. No matter how hard she pulled, the door wouldn't budge. Her heart raced as the tapping continued, relentless, filling her ears, echoing through every corner of the house. Just when she thought she couldn't bear it anymore, there was silence. The air was thick and still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Slowly, Ella turned around and felt her blood run cold. In the dim light she saw it, the shadow man standing in the middle of her living room, tall and featureless, its dark, hollow eyes fixed on her. It took a step forward and Ella stumbled back, pressing herself against the door. The figure moved closer, its shadowy limbs stretching out toward her. She could feel an unnatural cold seep through her body, numbing her, freezing her in place as the figure loomed over her. Summoning every ounce of strength, Ella forced herself to look away and squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. When she opened them again, the room was empty. The house was silent. Slowly, the door creaked open, and a gust of warm air rushed in, as if pushing her to leave. Ella didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys, stumbled out into the night, and didn't look back. Ella left the town the next day, never speaking of what she had seen. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake to a faint, familiar sound in her new home. Tap, tap, tap. And every time she would lie awake, heart racing, wondering if the shadow had finally come to find her.